And we're back. Guys, today's video is all about faction play in old school style games. This video is going to be just a little bit different than some of the other videos you might find on the subject online. In particular, we are going to look at how patron players can affect your factions in Dungeons & Dragons. So let's get into what are patron players. Patrons are high-level NPCs in your world. They are the big power players, the movers and the shakers. Maybe a high-level magic user, 9th level, a baron or a baroness. These are the NPCs in your world that the players usually will get their quests from, that in a normal game you might be controlling all of them as the dungeon master. But what sets this game apart is you hand off control of these high-level NPCs to people you know that you can trust to run them, and so that way you can free up your time to focus more on the day-to-day operations of your game. A patron player might have a really fun idea like, I want to invade this other town and destroy it, raze it to the ground. At this point, you have shaken up your world and your players will be reacting to it. Another patron might offer 1,000 gold to an adventuring party that is willing to go into this place and do a job for them that maybe this patron could do on their own, but it's small potatoes to them. And so they have all this extra gold, they can give it to the PCs who show up on game night to run these adventures. Now, at my table, I usually don't give control of a patron NPC to a player who has a character in the game world. I don't want any crossover and conflict of interest, but if you trust your players and you think that it's not going to be any kind of issue, don't feel like that's a hard and fast rule. That's just what we do at my table. I like to give those roles to the guys who want to show up at game night, but they just can't, time conflicts and stuff. And this way, they still get to keep playing. I think that these NPCs, these high-level power players, are really fun, and when they start pushing against each other, the world becomes so much more expansive and alive and dynamic. You really can't account for all of the decisions that they're going to be making because they're all vying for control of a very small region. And if you keep the power level about the same across the board, you're going to see a really fun interaction as they play politics with each other. They're constantly writing letters to each other to negotiate and backstab each other. If they control a chaotic NPC, they're invading towns and destroying cities, and that rallies everyone together. It is absolutely a fun and engaging system, and I encourage that you use patron players in your games. So I can't take credit for the idea of patron NPCs or patron players. It's an idea that came out of the old school revival, and I think that it is really fun. So let's take a look at how you would implement this in your game. In my table, we're playing a mixture of Barrow Maze and Keep on the Borderlands. We use old school essentials, and I have 11 players and currently 3 patrons, but it's going to jump up to 5 after this weekend. We've got a big war that's about to happen, and I don't want to give out a bunch of patrons if they're just going to die in battle anyway. We'll see how that all rolls out at the table later, but for now, a normal game night would be you send out a message to your group. You say who can show up on such and such night for a delve into Barrow Maze or into the Caves of Chaos. And these are your players. These are guys who are going to get gold. They're trying to find magic items. They're leveling up. They're the core of your game. But when you're not at the table, they're sending you downtime activities for their characters, and so too are your patrons. But their downtime activities are on a much grander scale than the PCs who say, I want to do some carousing and spend the week drinking and gathering rumors. The patrons, on the other hand, would rather maybe, I have a cleric, for example, who is running an inquisition and he's hunting down magic users. And so the scale of his actions are on the town level, on the the duchy level. Whereas the players are, they're interacting in like their neighborhood with their friends. I have NPCs I have patron NPCs that are engaging in warfare. They're using mass combat, sweeping these huge armies of hundreds of soldiers across the land. When you use these patrons in your game, you're going to find that their moves are so dynamic and so powerful that the entire world is built around what happens with these patrons. And so I would warn you not to allow your PCs to be overshadowed by the actions of the patrons. You have to keep the patrons in check to some extent, because if you're not careful, they will become like the main characters, and that's not the goal of this. Rather, it's they give you orders in their downtime, you shake up the world with what they do, and you roll all the dice to carry out those effects, and then you report to the players, these are the things that you know that have changed since the last time you played at the table. Some examples of great patrons that you could use in your world: the leader of the Thieves Guild. This guy is going to be hired by everybody. All of the patrons are going to be trying to gain his favor because he can steal. He's got an army of thieves that he can send out into the world that the other patrons can hire. Even the players will be interacting with this. Leader of an Assassin's Guild. This is a key aspect of one-to-one time and also patron play, is they are always backstabbing each other, and they need to be able to hire these assassins. So gaining the favor of the Assassin's Guild, whoever's got the highest coin or whoever can provide the most favors, will give the patron player who's controlling the assassin and the guild, they will feel so important. They will feel like their impact in the game is much more significant than anything they can do on game night with a PC. So it's a really exciting opportunity for them. There's also barons. You can make them high-level fighters or knights. High-level magic users are great because once they get to a certain threshold of spells, everyone wants their aid. And so these high-level magic users might not have armies, but they have armies fighting over who can gain their favor. These are all great suggestions. I would just say try to keep the power level about the same. Don't give one person a baron and another player a king, because if you do, obviously the king is going to have more authority in the game and it will unbalance the system a little bit. And now comes the part where we talk about one-to-one time. One-to-one time is an essential aspect to running patron players. If you want dynamic factions that are going to be battling with each other in warfare, that are going to be sabotaging each other, making big grand plans, building churches, expanding on crusades and their personal goals. If you want dynamic factions, you need to have strict timekeeping. If you don't, you'll have one or two patrons that will just run roughshod over everybody else in the game. They will say, hey, I want to do this, and this. And if there's no time constraints on all of their activities, then one patron will get all of their objectives done, and then the other patrons will be looking around like, wait, how much time has passed? Why didn't I get to have that same amount of time? How come we've moved 3 months ahead and this person's got 3 months accomplished and we've only done 2 weeks? So if you're using one-to-one time, every 1 day in the real world is also 1 day that passes in the game world. What that means is if this person wants to move, if this NPC patron wants to move their army to another city and attack them, they are constrained by time. Travel in the game, in especially Old School Essentials, it's very particular. You can move a certain number of hexes every day. You roll for random encounters. You roll for getting lost. These are the things that you do as the dungeon master to make sure that as these people are moving through time and through space in the game world, you're actually aware of where everyone is and all of the moving parts. They're giving you orders to do those things. You're the one who's executing on them. Now, one-to-one time makes this so much easier for you as the dungeon master because every time you send a text, we live in the information age, there's a timestamp on it. You know exactly the day they gave you the order. You know exactly how many days it's going to take, and you can message them. You will know the results in 2 weeks' time. You will know the results in 7 days' time. Then when that time comes, you send the message. That way there's no too much information going out before things resolve, because as an example, a magic user might say, I want to craft a spell and of a certain level. You can say, well, according to the rules, it takes you 1 month to do that. While they're spending that month, the patron player doesn't know whether or not they've succeeded. You can do the rolls whenever you want as the dungeon master. Just make a note and set on your phone a little alarm. Whenever this day comes, you give them the answer. So it's actually not so hard. I think it's, in fact, super easy to use one-to-one time, because the technology we have does all the time tracking for you. You don't have to balance, oh, well, this person's 3 weeks over here and this person has spent 6 weeks over here. It's all just done for you. That's a key aspect. Now, I don't think it's the only time system. You can use other time systems, but whichever one you choose, it has to be fair for all of the players. One-to-one time gets a lot of, I think, unwarranted hate online. People will ask questions like, if you just let time keep running, I think it's going to cause a lot of issues for you in the game. And sometimes the answers are pretty obvious, but it's just not the answer that people want to hear. So one question that comes up a lot is, well, what if your characters are in the dungeon when the game session ends? What do? Do you just spend the next 2 weeks camping down in the dungeon where every 10 minutes you're making a random monster check, and after a week, every 10 minutes you're going to have monsters all over them. They're going to be eaten and die. So that is the answer. Don't end your session in the dungeon. No matter what, time it to where you can get your way out. I heard a complaint like, well, what happens if you've set up a amount of time to get out of the dungeon, and you step on a portal and you're teleported to a place you don't know, or rocks fall and there's a collapse and you can't use the way you know to get out? What do you do then? Sadly, the answer is obvious. Your characters die. If a rock fall happens in the dungeon and there's no way out, you run out of oxygen, you are buried alive, your characters die, roll up some new guys, 3d6 down the line. That's how we do it. There was another one that was like, oh, okay, well, what if your patrons are moving their army across the hex and you have a group of PCs that are camped here? They've only got maybe 10 people in their camp, but this evil overlord is marching through. Well, what happens to them? Again, the answer is pretty obvious, but it's not the one you want to hear. The evil overlord would destroy them. I would message the PCs and say, hey guys, an army is heading your way. We would use the rules for evasion and pursuit from the player's tome, and we would roll it out. If they succeed in getting away, which they probably would, because as you know in the rules it says that smaller groups have a much larger advantage of getting away. But if they didn't get away, they become fodder. They are destroyed by their enemies. So I think that being neutral in your approach is really important for this, because when your patron players are stirring up the world, no one is safe. Everyone is like looking over their shoulder, expecting like something really bad to come your way. And while that might sound miserable for some people, if it's for you, if you think that sounds fun, I promise you're going to have a blast using patron players. So that's how we can shake up faction play in old school games. Yes, you can do it traditionally where you have a bunch of different factions, one representing the Thieves Guild, one controlling the Druidic circles, one controlling the church, and you can control all of those things, but you might find that it's hard to have the energy to create a compelling story and motivation for each different faction and keep that rolling for a lot of different players. And so I would challenge you, get some of your friends that can't make it to game night to send you messages on what they think their NPC would do. And you'll find that all of those heads put together are much smarter than just your one person all by yourself. I think it's a very fun and interesting way to play factions, and I encourage you to try. Thanks for watching. See you next time.